Now move to our first panel discussion of the day. It will be moderated by Nikita Gibson, Managing Director of Insurance Operations at Geneva International Insurance Incorporated. And this panel brings together Edward Millington, Founder and Managing Director of CariSec Global Incorporated, Gerry Kennedy, Founder and CEO of Observatory Strategic Management, Keith Downer, who's joining us virtually, co-founder of VENTI Global, and Curtis Lowe, Director of Supervision and Regulation at the FSC. They will explore the topic, Shaping the Future, Regulatory Foresight and Innovation in a High-Risk World. Please give them a round of applause to welcome them. Over to you, Nikita.
Good morning. Hello. Oh, there we go. Good morning again to everybody. Today we are looking at shaping the future, regulatory foresight and innovation in a high-risk world. So we often describe the Caribbean as vulnerable to climate risk, external capital flows, regulatory pressures, and global shocks. But what we don't say enough is that the Caribbean has actually absorbed more real-world systemic risk per capita than almost any region in the world. And yet, we are still importing solutions, importing frameworks, and importing capital structures designed elsewhere. And more critically, we are often responding to global regulatory shifts rather than helping to anticipate and shape them. So the core problem for this panel is not whether the risk exists. We know it does, right? The real question is, why hasn't the Caribbean converted its lived experience of risk into global leadership, not just in innovation, but in regulatory foresight? And more importantly, what would it take for this region to move from being a user of risk frameworks to being a builder of them and a shaper of what comes next? So given that introduction, I'd like to start with Mr. Lowe. From a regulatory perspective, Barbados has already demonstrated leadership with regulatory innovation, including things like the sandbox. But let's be direct here. Are we actively shaping global regulatory standards, or are we still adapting to frameworks developed elsewhere? And if the goal is to become a rule maker rather than a rule taker, what would have to change in how regulation is approached in the Caribbean today?
Okay, thank you, Nikita. I'll begin by echoing the sentiments of the chairman in terms of the FSC's positioning and where we need to go. Now, with what we have seen in the region and in Barbados, as you said, has been an approach of adopting frameworks which have been designed elsewhere, which do not take full consideration of our circumstance, our experience, of the data which we have available. What we as a region and as a jurisdiction will need to do is first of all recognize that we will not be a standard setter in every single sphere. So we need to identify, to use the chairman's analogy, the race which we specialize in, where we can medal, where we can podium. So what we'll need to do as a region is to identify the niche areas where we can specialize. We have done a commendable job with respect to the captive market, but we have not done what was necessary over the years to build on the advantage, the competitive advantage we have had in the captive space. So at the Commission and I guess regionally, what becomes necessary is to put the frameworks in place, put the resources in place, put the focus on the key areas. So at the FSC, what we have to strive for is a risk-based, forward-looking, outcomes-focused framework. What the Commission has done is we have kicked off a very ambitious transformation process. This process is targeted at having the right resources in place in terms of people, processes, and technologies, recognizing that the traditional way of regulating, of conducting risk assessments, of engaging with registrants was not the most efficient. So we are in the process of reviewing all of our processes. We are also seeking to digitize, and we're building capacity within persons and across teams. This will allow us to free up resources to do the critical thinking, the critical assessments which are necessary to allow us to develop and build out those frameworks. We have also, excuse me, we have also recognized that sitting at the table, having a seat at the table with respect to standard setting becomes important. There are global standard setting bodies in the insurance space, securities, credit unions, etc. And part of our strategic plan direction over the next few years is to build on what we have been doing thus far, with a focus particularly on subcommittees where the audience, the focus tends to be smaller states, where we can develop models which become exportable, which persons will seek to emulate. And the captive market was a space where we have done well. In recent times, we have seen Alberta, we have seen the UK, we have seen many jurisdictions recognizing the value of that space, recognizing the worth of the work that we have done as a jurisdiction, and they're now positioning themselves to leverage the insurers in the captive space to help develop their own economies. We also have to recognize, again, I'll refer to the chairman's comment, we have to recognize and accept that legislation has been a significant hurdle for us at the FSC and here in Barbados as a jurisdiction. We have taken the approach of, I would say, piecemeal approach of affixing patches to the legislation to seek to facilitate especially innovative products. The FSC Act in itself allows us a risk-based approach. The specified enactments being the Insurance Act, etc., are very rules-based. So what we have recognized is that it is necessary for us to refine and modernize our legislation for us to be able to take advantage of the opportunities in the market. So we have kicked off a relatively ambitious project where our General Counsel is leading that project, and we anticipate over the next 2 years we will have modernized legislation which is going to be risk-based, principles-based. It would allow us to move away from the piecemeal approach of having to rely on exemptions to facilitate innovative products. We want to ensure that on the innovation front, in addition to the sandbox, we are seeking to have an innovation hub. It's in a very embryonic stage at this point, but the innovation hub would allow registrants, potential registrants, a greater degree of flexibility than exists in the sandbox, given the sandbox has stricter requirements, and the hub allows for less structured, less rigid testing of products which can then end up being registered products.
Okay.
We also recognize that stakeholder engagement is key. Innovation is driven by the person sitting facing me. so those are the persons driving innovation. For us to make it to the podium, for us to develop as a jurisdiction, we have to have greater collaboration, greater stakeholder engagement. Part of our strategic plan for business plan 2026-2027 Stakeholder engagement is a key aspect of what we will do. And it's for us, again, not just to hear about the bottlenecks and pain points, but for us to hear of the plans that companies have, potential registrants, so that by having those conversations early, we are in a position to ensure that we have an enabling framework so that those registrants or potential registrants are able to bring those new or innovative products to Barbados to be regulated by the FSC, where through our transformation, we build out the resources to allow us to effectively supervise. And also as part of our transformation process, we are also relying more on soup tech solutions so that we have those automations to assist us in assessing risk in entities and potential products, etc. And that should allow us to have a more proportionate and nimble framework, which is enabling and allows for innovation and innovative products, more efficient risk management, more comprehensive risk management, more innovative risk transfer tools available to registrants.
So there's quite a bit then that the FSC is obviously working on. You've mentioned some timelines there, so when we come back to Brim in 2 years' time, we're expecting to have fulfilled a number of those things, including legislative changes, et cetera. So Gerry, just to kind of piggyback off of that, if there's any additional, maybe a little intro you want to give, but I do want to ask you, the Caribbean has had decades of lived catastrophe experience. There's real data that global markets just simply do not have, right? What is the first risk product the Caribbean should build and export globally? And who should be the one buying it? And more importantly, what is currently stopping this from happening, starting from Barbados?
Giving me the mic on this,
I'm
really?
giving you the mic.
Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Gerry Kennedy. I'm from the bleeding edge of this business. I actually hand the checks out. That's a great question, by the way. The regulatory process that you were speaking to is excellent, because I think what's happening here in this sovereignty is something that can happen. Back in 2005, the state flag of Florida was the blue tarp. We couldn't find roofing materials. We couldn't find generators. We couldn't get gasoline. That's part of a lifetime ago now. We're still in the same problems. And you're right, you do have the data here, but you also have the bankers. Look at you, Kevin. You also have the resources of the data. The data is where this whole thing is going to end up in this part of the conversation. But we, back in 2009, we went to congressional members of the United States and we proposed a material pre-positioning program, which would have been supported by your data. This keeps happening again and again and again. Part of our business is not only issuing policies, it's on the receiving end. When you look at a crying wife or kid, they've lost everything. I've done that. I've seen the tornadoes take things down. I've actually facilitated buying generators in Home Depots and Lowe's myself and delivering them myself. But what came out of that was, Barbados can do this, by the way, in your innovative box that you so aptly told the crowd. I'll give you a little lead in here. Material prepositioning should be an industry-wide opportunity where we can actually procure. Let's just talk about the buildings, the envelope of a building, the building material, the plywood, the things I drove by on the way here, it'll be the cement. You can't have that stuff necessarily in the line of the fight. I was in Puerto Rico recently. I saw they're still having problems with the power over there emanating from that hurricane, all fixable. So our industry has been a leader industry. You think about what we did. We didn't put seatbelts in the cars, but we made damn sure they got in there, didn't we? Saved a lot of lives. And I think our industry, and specifically, institutional people that are all sitting in this room right now can grasp. You don't want to be on the receiving end of one of these disasters, but I can promise you this: if I give you a check, you will not be able to live under it. I've pleaded for this for years from the industry. It's starting to take root. We saw the supply chain problems during COVID. That manifested as we were right. And Nikki, I know how passionate people are in this room. I love this business. I'm a little freakish, actually, in that respect. But But we can come up with a plan, be innovators, and it does take a jurisdiction like this, because I'm gonna tell you, I've been to Capitol Hill, and it doesn't get done up there. You need to have places with good minds, open minds, and Sir Patterson, wherever you're sitting, I can't see you out there, but they don't want to be seventh. This is the way to get to fifth, sixth, and at least get to the bronze medal quickly. Our industry is the capacity for change. We're the DNA of every business transaction on the world. So if we took a small part of what we take in premium and dedicated to loss mitigation, you cannot believe what we can do with unallocated loss expenses, and a lot more in the accounting campaign. The other part is if you're going to be taking your data and you can take these logics and apply accounting. There's probably plenty of accountants here. I saw PwC people here, and you can ask them later. These are pre-reserved practices. Can we use tax advantages, especially here, to propagate these types of ideas? Material replacement is something that has to start happening, because what I'm very fearful of is not just the Caribbean being the aggregate of the data and the recipient of these incessant hurricanes, but what I'm starting to get concerned about is a co-catastrophe situation. It almost happened in 2012. When we got hit in New York, we got hit pretty bad in the States during the Sandy Point. But people don't know there was an earthquake off the coast of Seattle that was pretty large. It didn't cause a tsunami on the West Coast. We are so close to having some duality from an aggregated risk that we're just not contemplating. I know we talk about wars, I'm going to stay away from that. But I think we can manage it from here. I think innovative products should also come up with innovative loss solutions. You control that. If you propagate, look, we'll give you this, but let's start looking at that too. I'm going to tell you, their bottom lines are going to get better. They'll do more business here because this is the people that this country would allow for that innovation. I think we got a golden opportunity to do something for the world right here. It's not going to get done in the United States. Believe me, I've already tried.
I'm going to come back to that.
I'll bet you are.
So Edward, if you can just give us some insight into this. So CRIF would have proved that the Caribbean can build global risk instruments. What would a Caribbean-led cyber risk instrument, such as a cyber cat bond, actually, what do you think that would look like from Barbados or from within the region in actual practice? And what's the single biggest barrier preventing us from building it today?
Hi, good morning, everyone. Nikita, is a very good question. One of I think over the last couple of weeks, we would have heard, I think one of our countrymen, the Caribbean, would have highlighted that no one is going to come to our help. So when we look at the risk that is growing outside of the climate itself, I'm more focused from a digital perspective, where digital transformation continues to evolve, many businesses and so forth. Our resilience in itself is not really sovereign. We always depend, using a Gerry word, but more probably in a different context, our materials are from someone else's country, AI, etc. So therefore, when a particular catastrophe occurs, how do you manage it? And from an insurance perspective, our underwriting is done from outside the region itself. So therefore, if we had to look at a cat bond from a cyber perspective, what we're really looking at is what Gerry would have mentioned, and Sir Chatterham would also mention, and the President, Mr. Yard from Biba, is the data. We currently live in an environment where we have the data to make the necessary changes, but again, this data is not standardized, as Curtis would have mentioned, to be able to implement what we call a parametric trigger, which is simply similar to what we have as a CC RIF. The parametric trigger is going to be very important in terms of how do we determine that. Is it going to be from a cyber incident loss index, or from possibly insurance terms, looking at a contagion index itself? how are you going to be able to obtain this necessary data to do that? So the Caribbean itself has the necessary, as a innovation hub itself, where we can pull together the necessary data under different contracts and agreements and so forth to be able to identify what this data will look like, what it's going to entail, and how we can actually use it to be able to trigger that parametric trigger that I would have mentioned. Now, one of the things, a different hat I have as the founder and chairman for the Caribbean Charter Institute of Cyber and Information Security, is to start working on something where we're looking at a resilient observatory, where we're able to pull all the necessary threat data, incidents and so forth with the different Caribbean entities itself. Also work on a framework that can govern the maturity, as all of you would know here, as it was mentioned to Curtis this morning. There are some form of guidelines that highlight we should do something, but there's really no standards that you can evaluate and mature. And if you're unable to do that, why should someone be able, from a capitalist point of view, put money into something that they don't know how it's to be modeled? So understanding modeling is going to be very critical. Next, what we have to look at now is, which is similar to the CRIF itself, is the multi-sovereignty risk pool. And in this particular context, what I'm really looking at is what are the countries or possible private entities that can come together, as Curtis learned me this morning. A lot of these things are going to have to be done from a country's perspective. And I did ask, why can it not be done myself here from Barbados, where we now look to have that risk pool built out from the region itself. Now, from a particular perspective, if you look at critical infrastructure, the insurance industry is a critical infrastructure, in addition to power generation, light and power, water, government, digital public services. In the event of let's say, a ransomware attack, let's say from Iran, etc., it also has a possible risk issue is that if you attack Barbados, Barbados can become a conduit for another Caribbean country. So you have this concurrent risks or concurrent losses that can travel from Barbados or into different entities, maybe even outside of Barbados. How do we resolve that catastrophic loss originating from cyber? So therefore, it's going to be a pool of different countries and most probably some private entities in part of that pool itself. Last but not least is the captive market, which can be driven via a SPV. I think this is also very critical because once we have the frameworks, we build the frameworks, we build the maturity, etc. We have the FSC to make sure that some of those things are actually in order. The next path is how do we provide the necessary capital or the interest into having persons to be able to come on board, to be able to fund maybe ILS, ventures and so forth, is going to be very critical, I think, as part of this capstone to make sure it can occur. One of the things I think that is not happening yet, I think, is vision, innovation. Yes, regulations can come, we can push regulations, but the main thing is just the incentive to start. We already have the CCRIF. We are already suffering losses in other manners. But with this current war where we have seen data centers being hit, we have seen cyber warfare now leaving the shores of, let's say, from the Middle East now into those who are supporting American interests. It means then that we have to be very vigilant and be able to enact these things and not wait for something to happen to then put it in place.
So we're hearing from the regulatory perspective what's coming, what needs to happen in terms of infrastructure. We're hearing as well as it relates to the catastrophes and the fact that we have the data here to be able to build something meaningful to export out. And then you're also hearing from the perspective in terms of cyber risk. It really just brings it all together to why aren't we doing what you guys have sat here all morning and said that we should be doing, right? So I do want to get another insight here from Keith as well, before I come back to that question. The Caribbean is increasingly part of the global digital and financial infrastructure networks, and the supporting risk and insurance products don't yet exist within Barbados or the Caribbean for a number of these risk profiles. What financial or risk transfer product must exist in the Caribbean first to fully participate in global digital systems? And why haven't we built it yet? You know, my questions are always the why. Why have we not done something as yet? And I'm looking forward to hearing you on that, Keith.
Good morning. My name is Keith Downer, and thank you for having me. Apologies that I'm not able to be there in the room with you, but hopefully,
For you guys?
can you hear me?
Yes, that's perfect.
Excellent. Good morning again. My name is Keith Downer. Sorry that I'm not able to be there in the room with you. It would be great to do that. And thanks for that great question. I think that, I've been involved in the Caribbean and financial services across the Caribbean for quite a while. And we have enjoyed what I would call a very dormant financial situation in the way in which we have serviced our communities. But that has rapidly changed in the last 18 months. Barbados has ventured out into connectivity across other markets, opening up channels through Africa, opening up channels in Europe. And Barbados has also moved forward with what I call digital implementation, trying to leverage more digital financial services. The issue around that, and I applaud the FSC for all of the fantastic planning and fabulous plans that they have for the next 2 or 3 years. But I would encourage that the chairman's comments around having what I would call task teams, looking at what's happening globally, to try to make sure that they're making adjustments more on a real-time basis, is implemented sooner rather than later. With the going live of the digital exchange in Barbados, with some of the digital projects awaiting licensing for Barbados, and with the connectivity to PAPS, as well as the political climate for Barbados. If you look carefully, Barbados is a very strong political advocate globally on lots of issues. And I would encourage both the risk and finance teams to take a look at when the previous data breaches have occurred, what else Barbados was involved in and around that period, commentary wise. So you will notice that the NIS, the other bank breaches, etc., did coordinate very closely with some other activities that were happening. And Barbados has all this data, you have all the information. And the question then becomes, how can you have a couple of teams between the FSC, the central bank, and the banking community to sort of run the analysis to figure out when credit spreads get squeezed, when operational losses increase, what adjustments you can make around those things to try to help in the environment. The reality is that the information is there. It's the courage to connect the dots and put executable teams in place to work on these things, to sort of share the information back to the regulatory teams. Regulation that takes 2 years to develop is required. I understand why the timeline looks that way, but the world we live in today is not waiting. I think the comment was made earlier about 2 natural disasters happening at the same time. But think about a hurricane in Jamaica, a war in Venezuela based out of Trinidad, and a data breach in Barbados, all happening at the same time. How do you handle that? What does that look like to the financial spreads? What does that look like regionally? Yes, no one is coming to help us, and that reality is understood. But what are we doing to help ourselves? And what are we doing to help manage this stuff? We do have the information. We do have the capacity to address this situation. In the room, I've seen quite a few faces of people in there who can help in this process. So the question then becomes, do we have the fortitude to put what I would call SWAT teams together to leverage the information that exists to help take actionable items back to entities like the FSC to suggest that as you're considering regulatory change, here is activities that are occurring today that would impact what you're looking at. The same for the central bank. It impacts not just the tier one capital being reserved by the financial institutions, but also from a government perspective, helping them to understand what they need to, quote unquote, prep for or be aware that can come next. I think this conference and the participants have a responsibility to take their experience and take their knowledge and take actionable steps to help drive some of the change that you've already started planning and you're working on. But the reality is that the world around the Caribbean, the world around Barbados, the world around financial services, the world around insurance is changing much, much faster than we're able to action based on the timelines that you've shared. So the question then becomes, how do you make adjustments to try to feed into that as quickly as possible? With Barbados going live on a digital platform, it's been delayed until June, I think. What insurance products are being rolled out for that today? I think this has to be some consideration around how financial institutions are going to safeguard themselves if they're going to be connected to a system that allows for access to their financial platform and can be infiltrated, is the term I'll use, by activities of others who may have not the best of Barbados interests at heart. And I haven't heard anything about that sort of insurance product. I haven't heard anything about the risk management capabilities around it. And I'm not sure what activities are there. So if I'm speaking out of turn, please feel free to correct me. But the FSC's new sandbox is a great opportunity to test some things in that. With the lack of structure, as I think it has been presented, or easier structure for playing, some very basic benefits of tax credits or something of that nature that was suggested before can help with that. But the reality is that the action needs to be now. So, Mr. Chairman, I appreciate your comments on what the activities are, but the activities need to be not just a couple of lawyers, but some bankers and risk managers working together to try to highlight immediately to use some of the existing issues that we see from the existing data that is occurring in the first 90 days of 2026. The first 3 months of 2026 have been extremely exciting. It's a lot happening in that short space of time. And there's been more data captured in that time than anywhere else that you can dream of, that you can use immediately to help shape and take action on some of the comments that are being made so far. In closing, I would say, or last but not least, I say around this, Barbados is moving forward, yes, and we have to enact a lot of these things to stay current. But I hope that in all of the discussions that we're having and all of the comments that we're having, we're using tools to help with the automation so that the individuals can be not only more efficient, but held accountable for all the activities that they're expected to perform. So efficiency is a great thing, but experience has shown me that if you're efficient and there's no way of inspecting what you expect, you can create other problems that would be quite catastrophic in the long run. The financial services collapse of 2008 showed us that our efficiency was so great we could get mortgages through the door that fast, except nobody knew where the mortgages were coming from. So just a caution.
I think Keith has led us with a call to action, so to speak. I've heard the insurance companies in there, and I've also heard the regulator in that. I just want to give the audience the opportunity to ask any questions at this point in time. If not, I do have some burning questions. So, audience?
Come on. There's a bed up here. Someone's going to ask a question.
All right. So I will get started with one question while you guys think a little bit. So to the panel, we've heard a number of strong ideas. We've heard the regulation, the cyber risk exposure, the data needs, the fact that there's more that is needed for the digital financial space. And whether it's regulation, capital, or product design, there's a bottleneck. So I think everyone here has identified that there is a bottleneck somewhere. So what is one thing that must be built, launched, or changed in the next 24 months to make everything that you guys have talked about this morning real? So I'll start with you, Curtis.
Thanks, Nikita. As the regulator, I think it is clear that what is critical is for us to streamline our legislative suite to make that legislation, as I said, more nimble and more proportionate, more fit for purpose. So we at the FSC, in line with the jurisdiction, we want to be future-proof. And again, it all relies on legislation. Our existence is via legislation, our powers are via legislation. And without the right suite in place, we are hamstrung. So within the next 24 months, the Commission will be updating and right-sizing its legislation to be more facilitative and to ensure that the framework is enabling and capital, which I will only touch on in passing, and that capital requirements are proportionate to risk, as opposed to the current framework which we have, where it's a fixed amount, and there are some lower risk business models which could benefit significantly from a right-sized approach, or which could be, you could have more entities attracted to the jurisdiction by having that approach. So that is one of the commitments from the FSC, which is to right-size
right-size the legislation.
Yes.
That's 24 months, Curtis, 24
Yes.
months.
Yes.
Gerry, what do you think? What do we need to do?
I'm ready to launch. Let's go. I'm like pent up, ready. I think you better go next door.
Edward, what do you think we can possibly achieve in the next 24 months? I mean, coming off of having the legislation in place, what do we do? What do we need to do from now?
I think what we really need is that collaborative. Everything, from my own perspective, is happening too much in silos. Take for instance, and not straying away, but if you look at a national cybersecurity policy and so forth, it's always happening in very small, dark corners. In this particular aspect, these risks are affecting all of us. It's not silo, it's not for one particular company, and everything's interconnect. We're now using AI. So from my own perspective, we need to start that collaborative effort. We need to put that, quote unquote, as Mr. Donner would have mentioned, we need this SWAT team that needs to come together. We have the data. We need to structure this data in a way that we can understand. We need to have it to be able to model for underwriting purposes and so forth. I think we just need to bring that team together and start working on it, because regulations is going to come. The regulatory aspect cannot be alone, so we still need to be part of that, but we need that strong collaboration in terms of going forward. We need to realize, what we want to move from position number 7 to position number 1. What is it going to take to get there?
Okay, so Keith, anything to close for us as relates to the next 24 months? What do we need to do?
I definitely think, as a sprinter myself, I don't believe in medals other than gold medals. So I think to get to the gold medal, we definitely need to put together the teams to execute on that immediately. I would raise my hand to the chairman and say, many of the talents that you have available to you, leverage them so that you can immediately start getting actionable things done to help to support the legislative process that has been put in place. I applaud the legislative process, but I think action needs to be taken to be actually able to use the data that is currently available to get executable things done. I congratulate the FSC on their efforts, and I congratulate Biba on what they're doing as well.
Thank you. So, Gerry.
Oh,
Is there
I'm all over
anything
Keith
else
right
to-
now. He's going to steal the show in about 2 seconds.
All right, so I'll leave you all with this. We have proven time and time again that the Caribbean can regulate. We know that we can supervise. We know that we can comply. The real question is, can we actually innovate at the same level that we regulate? Because right now, we are still too comfortable. Comfortable with captive insurance, comfortable with structures that worked 10, 15, 20 years ago, comfortable being participants in a system that others designed, and the comfort is now becoming a constraint. The opportunity in front of us is not incremental, it's actually transformational. New products, digital ecosystems, cross-border financial solutions, This is where the next decade of growth will actually come from. But it requires something that we don't talk about enough, and that's an appetite for innovation, not just in words, but in policy and regulation and in execution. So the call to action to all of you here today is simple. If we want to be taken seriously as a global financial center, we have to move from preserving what we have to building what doesn't yet exist. It's great to be number 7 in captive insurance. It would be fantastic for us to be number 1, but there are other industries and we need to be innovative. I want to thank the panel this morning.
May I add one thing?
Yes, please.
Keith, nice work on the connect the dots, by the way. I'm stealing that one. That was the tone. So I want to catch one thing before I go. You're right, Nikki. The data economy that's here is the path for everyone in here. The data economy is going to be a parallel economy. We're starting to insure it. We're going to have to put it in captive formats. It's not, the frameworks are being built, but if you've seen anything in the news lately, the litigation that's happening regarding data equity and who owns it and what they're doing with the downstream liabilities, it's absolutely no joke. It happened yesterday with a company based out in California. Starts with an F. But we had better be ready for that, and I think that's where Barbados is sitting absolutely in a perfect spot right now. And with innovation that you guys were talking about, you keep that receptible. We're coming.
Okay. Thank you for that. I want to thank my panel, Curtis Lowe, Gerry Kennedy, Edward Millington, and Keith Downer for joining us this morning. And I hope that you guys learned quite a bit.